Hello everyone. In this video I'm going to talk a little bit about problem solving. And this has to do with cognition and our thinking ability and our ability to solve problems. And our ability is a little different than mice, but sometimes not. Sometimes maybe we use some of the same problem solving techniques. And some of these will seem pretty familiar to you. So trial and error. So this is getting through the maze here. I guess this is the maze of cubicles here. You bump into the wall, you turn around and you go the other way. So you try stuff, you're looking for something maybe at the grocery store, you just go down every aisle instead of maybe thinking, oh, maybe it might be in the dairy aisle or the canned food aisle. So trial and error is you try it, and if it doesn't work, you try something else. Algorithms are kind of like a recipe or a plan to solve a problem. Maybe if you're putting together something from IKEA, if you read the instructions, hopefully that's using an algorithm. If you just try to put it together yourself, it's a little bit more like trial and error. And heuristics is an interesting way to solve problems. It's sort of a quick way to solve problems. And when I talk about the grocery store and thinking about where you might find that object at the grocery store, that's using a heuristic. It's kind of taking your knowledge of grocery stores and the item that you're looking for and applying that to the problem solving situation. So we'll talk a little bit about each of these in a little bit more depth. So trial and error is just keep trying things until you solve that problem. So this mouse is going to bump into the wall and back up and go around until it actually finds the cheese there. An algorithm is something that's step by step. So it could be a recipe, a math formula, a to-do list, so we know exactly what we need to do step by step. A program for the computer tells the computer step by step what to do. So that's an algorithm, and we use algorithms all the time to solve problems. And actually reading the plans to put together something is using an algorithm. A heuristic is kind of interesting, and I have a video that I'll put on here about heuristics that kind of helps explain it a little bit more because it's kind of an interesting concept. So it's this sort of problem-solving framework that we all use. So a lot of the time, especially when it's not a really important decision, we make a really quick decision about stuff. It's an educated guess. It's a shortcut to a solution based on your experience. So maybe you go to a restaurant and you're on a date with a girl and you don't want to sit there and spend hours reading through the menu. So you just order what you normally get and what you usually like. So that's a heuristic. It's a shortcut. You're just going to order what you've had before and not get too fancy at this point. And that's perfectly legit and normal. So it's not necessarily an exact solution to the problem. It's just a quick solution that you don't have to put a lot of mental effort into it. And we can make quick judgments sometimes. Sometimes we'll make decisions based on our political beliefs. So if we're a Democrat, we're just going to vote for the Democrat. If we're a Republican, we're just going to vote for Republican. We're not going to really research the candidates and really understand what they stand for. That's using a heuristic. We just base our decision on general knowledge that we have, and we don't go any farther than that. So heuristics are really interesting, and I encourage you to watch the video about it. It explains it a little bit better. I'm covering Einstein here. I don't know if I can move myself out of the way. I guess I can. So then there's also what we call pitfalls to problem solving. There's something called functional fixedness, and then there's also biases that cause us to make either the wrong choice, the wrong decision, or be unable to really to solve a problem. Albert Einstein said that insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result, but a lot of times we do that. Sometimes our problem-solving ability isn't that great. So functional fixedness is one of those problems. It's where we get stuck in one way of doing something and we can't see another way, or we're looking for the perfect way to do something. So if we want to hammer in a nail, we want a hammer to hammer in that nail. But if we can't find a hammer, could we use a shoe? Could we use a rock? Sure. So sometimes we get stuck in this idea of this is supposed to be used for this is not supposed to be used for that. And so it starts to become a problem when it's no longer working. In the book, they give an example of some kind of a problem that they give students to solve with a box and a candle, and I can't even remember all that stuff. I'm not good at solving those kinds of problems, but people that There are people that are much more functionally fixed than others. Some people that are much more rigid about the, how we use things and unable to kind of think outside the box. So functional fixedness, I guess, would be a really good example of not being able to think outside the box. You can just think of one way to use something and that is it. We also have a lot of biases that sort of interfere with our ability to make good choices in problem solving. One of them is called the anchoring bias. So we tend to focus on the first piece of information we get. So maybe we meet somebody and we have a bad impression of that person. We have a negative bias now about that person. And even though that bias is pretty anchored in us. And so when we see that person again, we still have that particular bias. So a lot of times the first impression or the first thing we hear makes it harder to change our second impression. So if we go to a used car lot and we're looking at cars and the salesman shows us a super expensive car and we're like, oh, we can't afford that. And then they show us another car that's much less expensive, then we think, oh, this is cheap. If we go to the store and the shirt's priced at $1,000, I can't imagine that, but oh, it's 75% off. We're not really thinking about the fact that, yeah, it's 75% off, but it's still a little too expensive for a shirt. So we kind of focus on that first bit of information that we get and we kind of ignore the rest when we're solving a problem. Hindsight bias, we have this idea that we could have predicted what just happened to us, even though we couldn't have. So a lot of times we beat ourselves up for thinking that there was some sort of reason that we should have known or something we should have seen, and oftentimes it's not the case. Representative bias really gets this idea of stereotypes. Does the person, the object, or the situation fit a concept or a prototype that we have in our mind? So do we have a prototype of what a convicted felon looks like? Is it Snoop Dogg or is it Martha Stewart? And I don't know if you guys even know who Martha Stewart is. She's kind of a decorating and home guru, and she's very wealthy. And her and Snoop Dogg actually have a cooking show on TV. And she actually went to jail and is a convicted felon because she did some illegal stock trading. And she'd actually been a stock trader before she got into the business of cooking and homemaking. But it's interesting, and Snoop Dogg has never been convicted of a felon. I think he's been charged maybe with some things, but he's actually kept himself quite clean, and he's doing this cooking show with her. I don't know how much cooking he's doing. I don't know much about it. But that's our representative bias. We expect a felon to look a certain way, right? And we expect somebody that's a chef to look a certain way. So we don't really expect that Snoop Dogg's a good cook, but probably is. I don't know. I've never watched the show. So these representative biases can get in our way because we think it should be one way and we make assumptions based on those biases, and oftentimes we're wrong. We also have a confirmation bias. So we look for things that confirm our beliefs, and we tend to ignore the evidence that contradicts our beliefs. And I think this happens a lot with our political divide, is that we tend to look for what confirms our belief, and anything that doesn't agree with us, we just ignore it. That's really not what our democracy should be about, but I think a lot of people are stuck in that. This last thing I'm going to talk about is the availability heuristic or bias. So we tend to base our ideas, our opinions, and our problem solving based on available information. So we tend to overestimate things that we're hearing about a lot. So we hear a lot about plane crashes and train crashes and horrific events on television, car accidents. And the more we hear about it, the more we think that it happens all the time and it's going to happen to us. We hear lots of news stories and we think that it happens all the time. We think about school shootings and mass shootings. Seems like we hear about them a lot, so it feels like they're happening all the time, and they're really not happening all the time all over the place, but anytime they happen, it's a horrible event, so it really sticks with us. So we have this availability heuristic where we think that just because we've heard about it a lot, it's going to happen. And truly the odds of dying in a plane crash are really low. They're lower than dying in a car accident, and yet people feel much safer driving than they do flying. But this availability heuristic makes us believe that we're safer in a car than we are in a plane. So that is it about problem solving.